Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Top 10 players for this Oregon Ducks program heading into 2024. And for the Oregon fans that have been listening for the last couple of weeks and months, you guys know I am extremely fired up to get into this list. And although this list was extremely fun to put together, it was also extremely difficult. I mean, we were leaving a lot of really good football players off of this list heading into 2024. And I think it really shows two different things. One, the top end talent is certainly there for this Oregon team heading into 2024. But I think more importantly, the depth of this program is certainly there as well. I don't know if there's a program that has done a better job balancing using the transfer portal while bringing in really good high school recruiting classes than Dan Lanning in this Oregon team. And I think it reflects with how talented this roster is heading into 2024. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, I just want to give a really special shout out to the Oregon fans. You guys know I've had a blast talking this program, but more importantly, the Oregon fans, you guys continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support to the fellas. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear your top 10 lists in the comments section. Shout out some players that I might be sleeping on heading into 2024. I learned a ton from you guys, but more importantly, I just love talking ball with you guys in the comments section. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with former Michigan State defensive lineman Derek Carman, as he's going to be one of the more impactful transfers that this Oregon program was able to land. I was very vocal that one thing that held Oregon back in 2023 was not having enough difference makers, those game records on the inside of the Oregon defensive line. That's me not necessarily taking a shot at guys like Popo or guys like Casey Rogers. I just didn't think those guys were true kind of all-American talents. You look at a guy, and Derek Carman was one of the better interior defensive linemen in the Big Ten last year. And, although the box score probably doesn't reflect that, 3.5 tackles for loss, only 1.5 sacks, you watch the film, you kind of dive deeper into the numbers. This was a guy that led this Michigan State team in quarterback hurries from the inside of the defensive line, was second on this Michigan State team with 20 run stops, a guy that I think can get after the passer from the inside, but also be, kind of that physical interior presence that can eat up double teams, allow his linebackers to kind of work downhill. I think he checks off a lot of boxes, but I think most importantly, he's a difference maker on the inside of the defensive line. I think that's what exactly Oregon needed heading into the 2024 season. Going to number 9, and I'm going to go to Tashim Johnson, a guy that I think is just criminally underrated. And not enough people are talking about how valuable Tashim Johnson was, not only to this Oregon team in 2023, but I think more importantly, how valuable he's going to be in 2024. A guy that can play so many different roles in this Oregon defense. He can rush the passer. He can play that nickel role. He can play that box safety role. And you look at Oregon, I think they're going to use Tashim Johnson in a lot of different ways. He was second on the team in both interceptions and pass breakups last year. But I think most importantly, he missed 5.8% of his tackles last year. That is an extraordinary low number for a defensive back. And you talk about trying to get as much athleticism and coverage ability on the field, but also having guys that can stand up in the run game. Tashim Johnson allows you to do that. He can match up with slot wide receivers, but he also can be a guy that if you're going to play him in the line of scrimmage, he's a plus in the run game. He's certainly not a liability. He adds to what Oregon can do, stopping the run, the experience, the versatility, but most importantly, just the all-around solid play Tashim Johnson brought to this Oregon team in 2023 and will bring to this team in 2024. I think he's a top 10 player on this Oregon Ducks team that probably just doesn't get talked enough about. Going to number 8, and that is going to be Terrence Ferguson. And it's crazy that we're talking about one of the best tight ends in the country coming in at number 8 for this Oregon team. I think that tells you how good some players are that are going to be in the top 5. You take a look at Terrence Ferguson, and I think he checks off like all the boxes that you want in a tight end. He was third on the team in first down catches when Oregon needed somebody to move the chains on those third and medium spots. Terrence Ferguson was often the go-to guy. And I think more importantly, an 82% completion percentage when targeted. That is a number that I always look for tight ends. You don't necessarily need to make the game-changing plays, the circus catches. You have guys like Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart to kind of play that role. What I want in my tight ends are guys that can create separation, can be those matchup nightmares, operate in those kind of congested middle of the field situations. And I think Terrence Ferguson is that kind of guy, but I think he's a plus playmaker because he's a guy that can operate after the catch. 13 missed tackles forced, over 260 yards after the catch. He is a reliable tight end. That's a matchup nightmare in this Oregon offense. Terrence Ferguson, you add him to this loaded wide receiver room, he's going to have a year for this Oregon program in 2024, going up to number 7. And we're going to go to running back Jordan James. And I think there's going to be a lot of college football fans that see Bucky Irving move on to the NFL draft and say, Oregon's going to take a step back in the running back room. And I think a lot of Oregon fans are sitting there and saying, this is certainly no disrespect to Bucky Irving, who was a phenomenal player for Oregon in 2023. I think a lot of Oregon fans are sitting there and saying, our running back room, it might be better than it was in 2023. Jordan James was a guy that on 107 attempts averaged 7.1 yards per carry, had 11 touchdowns. You start taking a look at some of those in-depth numbers, 4 yards per carry after contact. He is exceptional at working through contact, bouncing off tacklers. But then the thing that I wanted to star, I put 2 stars next to this stat. He had 21 carries of 10 plus yards. I think the narrative around Jordan James is he's kind of a goal line back, a short distance kind of back. But when he gets to the second level, he has a lot more juice than a lot of people like to appreciate. He's one of those guys that you combine him with Jay Harris, 2 big physical running backs. That is going to be a burden for a lot of Big Ten defenses to tackle 20 to 25 times a game. Then you sprinkle in a guy like Noah Whittington. I think this running back room is absolutely loaded, but I'm taking Jordan James as that number 7 player for this Oregon program, going to number 6. And again, I think it's crazy that we're talking about Evan Stewart being the number 6 player on this Oregon team. And I think largely a guy that is getting slept on by some Oregon fans as well. 12 months ago, we were talking about Evan Stewart being a top 3 wide receiver in the country. And from a physical perspective, I don't think anything's changed. I think he has certainly the talent to be a first-round caliber wide receiver. I think he has the talent to be a top 3 wide receiver in the country. You look back at that season in 2023 and say, I mean, one, that program was just kind of imploding, I should say, under Jimbo Fisher. He had not so good quarterback play. Obviously, the starting quarterback goes down week 4. Evan Stewart's numbers kind of suffered because of that. But you just take a look at Evan Stewart and take a look at the physical traits, the ability to create separation, the ability to win vertically down the field, the ability to operate after the catch. There's really not a box that Evan Stewart does not check as a wide receiver. And he's coming in at number 6, but I think he's one of the best wide receivers that you see in the country heading into 2024, going to number 5. And I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite players on this Oregon team. And there's a real possibility that we're talking about Josh Conerly Jr. being the best player, the highest draft pick for this Oregon Ducks program during the 2024 year. You take a look at a season last year. This was his first year starting at left tackle at the Power 5 level. Josh Conerly Jr. played exceptionally well the last 6 games of the season, largely played really well the whole season. But you take a look at the last 6 games, gave up 0 sacks, only 3 quarterback hurries. You saw him play his best football towards the end of that 2023 season. If he can take that performance and make it a little bit more consistent in 2024, you're looking at, and in my mind, a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. At the end of the day, they don't make many Josh Conerly Jr.'s with the big body, the functional athleticism, the ability to match athletically with edge rushers, but also the ability to move people off the line of scrimmage in the run game as well. Super, super high ceiling for Josh Conerly Jr. Coming in at number 5, very well could be talking about as a top 3 player for this Oregon program. And going to number 4, and I went with the right tackle, Johnny Cornelius. The first thing you got to talk about is in a college football landscape where so many programs were desperate for starting caliber tackles, I think Oregon's looking at potentially 2 first-round NFL draft picks with Josh Conerly Jr. and a Johnny Cornelius. And I went with the Johnny Cornelius 1 spot above Josh Conerly Jr. because he probably played a little bit more consistent throughout that 2023 season. 0 sacks, only 10 quarterback hurries allowed on 500 pass per opportunities, has played over 2,300 career snaps going back to his time at Rhode Island. This is a guy that made that jump from the FCS level to the Power 5 level, made it seamlessly. If he can build on what he did in 2023, you're looking at one of the best tackles in the country. Going to our top three, and let's talk about quarterback Dillon Gabriel, who or some really weird narratives going around about Dillon Gabriel. At the end of the day, you look at the 2023 season for Dillon Gabriel for Oklahoma, over 3,600 yards, 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, a 70% completion percentage. And I mean, one of the narratives was, does Dillon Gabriel have that top end arm talent? And is it going to be coveted by the NFL? And maybe the answer is no. But you start looking at some numbers and say he completed 40% of his passes, 20 plus yards down the field. He was top 10 in the country in both completion percentage and yards per pass. So, excuse me, Dillon Gabriel is pushing the ball down the field, but also completing a very high number of his passes. That's what you're looking for at that quarterback position. He's 8th all-time in passing yards coming back for a 6th season. You're talking about a guy that I think certainly can win a Heisman Trophy for the Oregon Ducks in 2024. He's going to have the offensive line to do it. He's going to have the talent around him. But I think the most important talking point with Dillon Gabriel is I think he's a perfect fit in this Will Stein offense. When you talk about how Bo Nix operated last year, ball was coming out quickly on time to their playmakers, allowing them to operate after the catch. Dillon Gabriel, that's exactly how he's suited. He's extremely accurate, attacking that short intermediate route tree. He consistently gets the ball out quick, can extend plays when you need to. I think Dillon Gabriel has the perfect skill set for this Oregon offense. And I think with all this talent around him, with Will Stein calling the offense, I think you're going to see Dillon Gabriel put up some big time numbers for this Oregon program. Going into our top 2 players, I went Tez Johnson at number 2. Now I'll just say this. I think in my mind, there's a clear top 2 players on this Oregon team. It's Tez Johnson and Jabbar Muhammad. You can stack those guys any way you want them. I probably wouldn't argue with that. You look at Tez Johnson just flying under the radar last year because everybody wanted to talk about Troy Franklin, who's a phenomenal wide receiver in his own right. You look at Tez Johnson, one quarterback-friendly wide receiver. This is an elite wide receiver with elite short area quickness, knows how to create separation in man coverage, but I think most importantly, operates after the catch just about as good as any wide receiver you see in the country. And just like we talked about with Dillon Gabriel, the whole point of this Oregon offense is to get playmakers the football in space and let them operate after the catch. Tez Johnson's skill set is perfectly suited for what Will Stein wants to do. And then you look at Dillon Gabriel, the type of wide receivers he wants to go after. I mean, Drake Stoops went for over 1,000 yards for Oklahoma at the slot wide receiver spot last year. I think Tez Johnson, quite frankly, is just a better Drake Stoops. And so I think that connection between Dillon Gabriel, Tez Johnson is going to be one of the better quarterback wide receiver duo connections that you see in the country. And going to number 1, and that's going to be Jabbar Muhammad. And the thing I love most about Jabbar Muhammad, and we can talk about the numbers really quick, a 51% completion percentage when targeted, faced over 80 targets last year. He was getting tested, and it was extremely hard to get the ball to wide receivers that were on Jabbar Muhammad. And I think most importantly, you look at Jabbar Muhammad, he's one of those rare cornerbacks that follows the wide receiver one. Jabbar Muhammad wants to be matched up with the best wide receivers on opposing teams. Obviously had some good games against Troy Franklin last year. Now he's on the Oregon Ducks. You talk about trying to deal with some of the elite wide receivers that you're going to see in the Big Ten, teams like Ohio State. Jabbar Muhammad can be that cornerback that just kind of takes away a wide receiver one for a team. And when you have a cornerback that can do that, there's only a few in the country that I think can, right? Will Johnson at Michigan, probably Benjamin Morrison at Notre Dame. It's a short list of cornerbacks that can do what Jabbar Muhammad does. I think it's a massive asset to this Oregon program, going to be a massive addition. He's coming in at number 1. Now, I want to take a maybe 45 seconds to a minute and just shout out some honorable mentions for this Oregon program. Jeffrey Bassa, I think, could be one of the better linebackers in the Big Ten. Trayshawn Holden, I think he's a wide receiver one on a lot of Power 5 football programs. Couldn't even get him on the top 10 list. Jordan Birch is another guy. Mateo Yu is certainly a guy that probably isn't a top 10 player right now, but we check in back in October and say, oh yeah, he's a top 8 player for this Oregon program. I certainly wouldn't be surprised about that. And I think it just shows that mean, the top end talent is a lot of first round caliber NFL dudes. But then you look at 10 through 25 and say, this Oregon team has all conference players between those ranges as well. I think that's what makes this Oregon team so special heading into 2024. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the list. Again, appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.